Hi, this is Gary Auden, and I'm bringing you an EDUcast, mobility in the remote office, branch office, small office, home office environment. As we do in every EDUcast, we introduce who we are. I'm going to be the moderator, and Tommy Lee is going to be the person I'm going to be interviewing. He's the Director of Strategic Alliances from VTech. As we always do, we talk about what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this environment. What is important about the small office environment, the SMB environment, that's different than being in, let's say, in a large headquarters. We're going to focus on key systems and how they developed, why office mobility is important. We're not talking about cell phones here. We're talking about mobility within the office. We will talk about how to modernize this and make it a SIP-connected environment. We'll spend a moment on DECT technology, the wireless technology that you should be using. And we'll talk about how, in the end, you want to emulate the old key system with modern capabilities. So Tommy, let's start off with the first question here. What's the commonality among all these remote office, branch office, small office, home office, and SMB locations?
The demands for a small and medium-sized business is really no different than setting up for a large enterprise. The big issue here is for the provider that brings the voice technology into the SMB office. I mean, what you really want to do, and in the minds of everybody on both the client as well as the provider end, is really time to talk. In all these environments, you have people that are just as demanding, but typically you want them to really set up the system as quickly as possible and to also minimize, if not eliminate, training wherever you can in these environments.
Okay, Tommy, let's talk about the needs of these kinds of environments.
Now, in these needs, most of the SMB needs are very similar to the large environments. You have multiple lines, but in many ways it's scaled down to the small environment. You have lots of people, 1, 2, maybe up to 4 people who handle multiple lines, which means that they could be in the front office, back office. But what happens is that offices tend to receive multiple calls, and yet you have to find a way to set up and manage multiple lines very easily. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, as you upgrade your system from, an old, key type system into a new software-based system, there are a lot of intricacies that people have to learn to really adapt the new technology. And what you want to do is be able to go in, install a system really, really quick, and be able to get out and have the user just intuitively start using the system as soon as you leave the office.
Years ago, I had a 1A2 system installed in my home. I had a business line, my personal line, and 2 teenage lines. The 1A2 is sort of the grandparent we're talking about. Can you go into that a little bit, please?
Absolutely. This phone looks very familiar. I remember using this when I graduated from college many years ago. And it really provided the end user a very, very easy system to be able to manage multiple calls. In a small and medium-sized business, you notice that on the phone that you see in front of you, you have probably 5 different lines that people can see, and you can tell just by glancing at the phone who's on the phone, who's off the phone, etc. And very often, all people had to do was to click one button on the phone when they picked it up. Typically, it was a blinking button, and you could easily pick up a blinking call when you noticed that everybody else was on the line as well. So this was sort of the baseline of which most people have learned how to manage multiple calls.
Let's talk about now the evolution of the key system, because it was a hardwired system and it's been changing since then.
Correct. In this key system evolution, what you have done is you've really gotten an old system that was really hardwired. Many people can remember when they look inside the key system block where they actually see the old, those big wire blocks that look like a rat's nest when you opened it up. But that was really the nest that required all the connections of phones in a small, office. And people had no idea what color led to what phone. And as that system began to evolve, many of those systems have gone into a software-based system. And in addition to that, as you note on the last button below, many of those systems had intercom features as well, which In SMB offices where you have front and rear offices, you had the ability to go out and intercom and say, John, can you pick up on line 3? And then they could just go ahead, look at those buttons and just push on line 3, and all of a sudden they would just pick up a call. But a lot of this evolution goes through from an actual hardware to a software-based system change.
Let's continue that discussion of what key systems are like today.
Okay. What key systems are like today, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the future, is the evolution into a SIP standard. And what a SIP standard does is it gives a lot of what people used to do in hardware a software base. And when you look at that, what you're doing now is being able to provide the old technology and that manageability into a open software-based system where you bring all those same feature sets. But there are some shortcomings, as I will note in some future slides, as it is today.
One of the things that we talked about is that a key system should be very easy to learn. Can you give us some pointers there?
Absolutely. When you're handling multiple buttons, they always say that the best design products are the products that you can just deploy and not be able to pick up the user manual to use it. And in the old existing key system, as we talked a little bit about the 1A2 system, is that when people see a blinking light, they say that there's an activity going on, and when they're hearing a ring in the background, it's just very intuitive to go over, push one button, and you can be able to transfer that call right to that user instantly. For people who manage multiple calls, you could see a blinking light. And so if there is a front desk or a reception, that person could just put that initial call on hold and see multiple blinking lights, and then you just have to communicate which button needs to be picked up by whatever person, and that person just goes and pushes one button, and then the call gets transferred over. There's nothing that gets far simpler than that. The challenge that we're running here is that as we move from what was once a hardware-based system into a software-based system, the software standard was never built around the key system thinking. So as a result, there is a learning curve, which is a kind of an obstacle in the adaptation of people that want to want to upgrade into a SIP-based system.
One of the points that I was making earlier is we're talking about mobility within the office rather than mobility outside the office. What's so important about that?
The real key system about mobility is that in the past, what people had to do with a hardwired system was to come up with very fancy automated ways to pick up for phones remotely and be able to hang up remotely because people just don't stay in their desk all day, whether you're in a small business environment or a large business environment. But in this case, in the small, people have to leave their desk to go file something or to go to the back office to pick up something from the back. But when they're doing that, they're giving up their capability of picking up, phone lines. What you're also, we recognize is that in a small business office, you have the challenge of being able to set up that small office from an infrastructure standpoint. Many small offices still have the old analog lines, which haven't been upgraded to Ethernet. Well, what I'm going to talk about in the future slides is being able to bypass that costly upgrade and be able to go directly to the closet and be able to deploy a wireless key systems solution that gives quick time to talk, and as well as being able to provide the end user the flexibility to be able to move their location anywhere they want to without having to call for support to move their desk from point A to point B in a small office.
Does this mean we're eliminating a lot of the cabling?
That's correct. In fact, many people out there that need to upgrade their cabling, you could basically bypass that step and be able to use a system I'll talk about shortly to really outfit an entire SMB to support talk, key system, and then be able to not upgrade the existing wiring in the office.
You mentioned SIP earlier, and everyone talks about SIP and relates it to voice over IP, but why connected? What's the value of it?
The great value of SIP is that we have gone away from a proprietary hardwired system in the past into something that's an open software standard. SIP is really now the open standard which most businesses, nearly all businesses, are using to upgrade their voice communication system. Many of the big providers all use SIP, and it also gives the end user the ability to adopt many different systems that comply to the standard. You can have many things that communicate with SIP, like unified communications, and be able to gain new services as it's introduced, because this is all software-based services. One of the drawbacks of SIP is that because it's sort of an open standard, what it did do is that it kind of veered away from the ease of use ability in supporting people that grew up knowing how to use key systems. So there's a gap that exists in the market, so that when people upgrade their phones, they're realizing, my gosh, I used to be able to do one button pressing, but now I have to go through, call parking and key transfers and knowing the extension I have to do. So what was once a one button push now becomes a multi-button or a very confusing process to be able to manage multiple calls.
Now, we've been talking about mobility and we've talked about wireless. Why was DECT selected for this? What's the value?
The great value for DECT is very, very simple. DECT is a very, very mature technology that uses radio frequencies to really transfer your voice. And what that really means is that many people in the industry are used to Wi-Fi. And with Wi-Fi, with wireless LAN, you have to really contend with quality of service issues, which means that when people, adopt DECT, then they're getting wired speeds, which means that you could actually put the base station next to the router and the switch that's located in the corner office and hardwire that and be able to deploy to all the different workstations and desks in the office under wireless environment. And what that really means is that the transmission from the desk to the actual base station that's in the closet is wireless, and you don't want to have that traffic contend with people that are downloading large files, because when that happens in a wireless LAN environment, you end up having choppy voice commands, because that environment is first come, first serve, assuming that you don't have a sophisticated QoS wireless environment in your small business environment.
When you're talking about DECT, we're talking about something which is exclusive to voice, which is important. But how in the world do we connect to distances further away, like within a warehouse?
Correct. The distance that really is that this solution is suitable for is really up to 1,000 feet. Now you have about 500 feet of mobility starting from the base station. That's that little center box that you see in front of you with the antenna. And you could actually deploy both a desk set as well as a handset up to several hundred feet away from the base station. Now, not all offices are built as a perfect square. Now, what you end up doing is, to accommodate for that, on the right, we actually build extenders that then the installer can install extenders to customize the wireless DECT environment to suit their particular small office needs. You can have this base station hooked into the back office, but how do you communicate to people in the front office? If the office is big enough, you may be able to stick an extender module in the front office to extend the range so that you can roam from the back office to the front office and vice versa without losing any communication abilities. You could roam between the two stations without losing a call.
Now, you're talking about a solution here, a 4-line key system emulation, but using these new technologies. Would you go over that for us?
Absolutely. In this system that we're showing here, we're introducing we call it a 4 LED key line. And what you see on the actual phone is LED lights. And what this system does is mimic the old key system that a lot of people have grown up with and are used to in the old legacy systems. And what that results in is zero in terms of behavior change in operating the phone system, so that in time to talk, people can actually use the system and intuitively operate it without any training. You see both a handset as well as a desk set. And in our historical history in providing cordless systems into the business marketplace, the typical ratio is either 2 or 3 handsets to 1 desk set in most SMB environments, because you have the main person who handles most of the calls using the desk phone, while being able to give the people with further mobility with the handsets that they could actually clip into their belt pocket and be able to walk around wherever they go to, or even have a remote location. But the good news is you could combine each one of these to suit their particular office needs. You could have 3 desk sets and 1 handset, or you could have 4 handsets and up to 5 desk sets. The total phone capability that it supports is up to 10. That has that can support a total of 8 SIP accounts that you can manage and be able to look at up to 4 separate calls that are happening at the same time on the backlit LEDs that exist on the phone, which makes using the system very, very intuitive.
Let's continue to talk some more about the benefits.
Absolutely. What's shown on this slide here is using both systems, the desk set as well as the handset. And you notice that you see the classic hold key that's located right next to the LEDs. If you go back to the 1A2 slide, you notice that the hold key was located right next to all of the busy keys. We designed this phone the same way so that when you see a blinking light as well as calls that are busy, you can manage those multiple calls very, very easily. And in addition to that, I also talked about intercomming. This system also supports intercomming so that if you have a much larger office that's beyond a shouting distance, like saying, "Excuse me, Gary, can you pick up on line 3? If you happen to be in the back office, I could intercom to your phone and be able to say, "Gary, can you pick up on line 3? You pick up your handset, look at line 3 blinking light, and you just push the button and it's done. So that's how simple it is. And there's also a quick YouTube URL that's provided on this slide that you can actually see a video version of actually how this thing works.
That moves into the question which you keep pointing of easy to learn. Let's talk about that.
What you see here is really the same look and feel that people are familiar with. I've heard numerous stories where companies have actually upgraded the old legacy system into the new SIP-based system, but the feedback that we get from a lot of clients is, look, what I used to do with just a 1-button push, now I have to call Park and transfer these calls onto specific extensions, and it becomes cumbersome. So they, on the first hand, they go, wow, I just upgraded my system, but I have to do 3 or 4 times the work to do the same thing I used to do with the old system. At the same time, from a provider standpoint, in order to even come close to an emulation system, you have to really configure the existing button keys in a very sophisticated manner to mimic that type of behavior in a key system. So what VTech has done is being able to take all of that knowledge base and really simulate that onto the base station. So what we've done is really cater that technology to how the user expects the phone system to behave, rather than the rest of the world who expects the user to adopt the way SIP standard has been, given to them.
Let's continue and talk about the specific product, the Eris terminal, the DECT 4-line base station.
Great. This is where the base station is. I won't go into the details of all the different technology. You can read that on your own. But the great news is that this base station is where all the different SIP accounts get programmed into. And this station sits in the corner closet where the router and switches are located into the SMB environment. So what you do is once you plug this into your switch or router, you could then you connect the IP address that's been assigned to this base station and be able to configure it over an easy-to-use GUI interface. The great news is that you end up supporting wired line speeds between the base station and switch, and then using the antenna to really deploy to all the different desks and workstations in the SMB environment over wireless communications.
Let's talk about, we have 2 different devices here, the desktop version, and then we'll go into the handheld version.
One of the great things about this solution is that, number one, all of the devices that I'm showing here has a 3-year warranty, so that anything that goes wrong with this, VTech will stand behind its product. But as I mentioned earlier, people are used to 2 different formats. You can have a desktop version, as you note on the upper left right-hand corner. You have 4 different LEDs that kind of give you a real-time environment of where the multiple calls need to be picked up. You also have speed dial keys and be able to have a very easy access to hold keys. One of the hidden features about this desktop phone is not only is it wireless to the base station, but you can actually unplug this desk phone and locate it wherever you want to, because this desk phone actually has an internal battery which enables it to talk the entire day without it being recharged. So if you happen to have like an upfront location where it's temporary, you can unplug the phone and locate the phone anywhere within the office and be able to have connectivity within the DECT range.
Let's move on to the handheld version.
Now, the handheld version has the same capabilities as the desktop version, with the perhaps lesser easy access to the speed dials. This is for the person who has mobility within the office. You can actually use this phone to clip on the side of your on your belt, or keep within your pocket somewhere. And it has the ability to intercom amongst each other as well as the desk phone, and it gives you the same standby as well as the capability of picking up multiple calls by just looking at your handheld and seeing which LED is busy to be picked up. And you could as well hold as well as transfer a call using the same handheld as well.
Let's talk about that repeater, because I think that's very important. It extends the range and coverage.
Correct. Not all offices are made as a perfect square to have equal coverage all around. And if you happen to have a very elongated office, you can use these repeaters. You can cascade up to 2 repeaters in a row, or even use a total of 5 to really enable the customization to extend the DECT network to fit the size of your office. And all you really need to do is, once the repeater is paired to the base station, you could just find anywhere that has a plug-in outlet on your wall, and then be able to extend the range of your DECT station at a distant location even further, just by finding a power line to this device.
I saw these 2 testimonials and I put them on the screen here. It really is important that people know just how easy this is.
Absolutely. We've gotten a lot of feedback from our resellers that have installed this system, and it's been phenomenal. You know, they're able to install the system on any SIP-based system. That really gives them a quick plug and play. And as I mentioned earlier, they don't have to set up any very complicated configuration screens on any button to be able to mimic an old key system. This one is already done right out of the box. So all they need to do is register the SIP account, and they're done. And they could just walk away and not be able to quote a cabling type of solution for them, only upgrading their installation costs. They can just kind of configure the system, be able to enable their end client to talk, and then walk away and move on to the next project.
I think it's important that people who don't have a knowledge of VTech is, what's the advantage of a company like this?
Yeah, VTech has been providing mobile phones. Most people know us in the home environment, but we're providing huge solutions into the business environment as well. We're a global leader that sells throughout the world, in both Americas as well as throughout Asia, Europe, etc. And the great news about VTech is that we have an existing install base within Americas. We have everywhere from Maine through Washington, even through Canada. We have people that are actually located here who are product experts, so that people who are just spinning up on this technology, we have the resources available to bring that knowledge base down to our partners, as well as being able to support your end customers through extended warranties like 3-year warranty, and have feet on the street to be able to provide you with the greatest level of support behind this leading key system technology as well.
I'd like to point out here some contact information. VTech has been around for years. I was surprised how big the company is, and so it's got really good, strong financial support. Thank you again, Tommy, for this information, and I hope people have learned something from this EDUcast.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you for those who are participating for your time as well.